we've got Mark here, who's been here with us for a few weeks, and hopefully he's going to be quite regular with us. If you look back in the past episodes, of which there's a link in the YouTube description, you'll see that last year we had Mark on as a guest, partly talking about his great guitar build-off guitar that he built, and we also had Ty on at the same time, or a few weeks apart from him, talking about his great guitar build-off. Scott's been here since the beginning with me, and
nobody cares about my great guitar build-off.
No, well, I think we've shown it a bit, but we should have an episode where we get to talk more about all your builds, Scott.
Yeah.
Which one? I mean, are we going ice cream sandwich? Are we going mac and cheese? Even though that wasn't a great guitar build-off, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities here, bud.
There is. The ice cream sandwich is a popular one on here, and also we've got here Arran, who first-time guest. Apologies for the shambles at the beginning, but welcome. Look, Arran, what I thought was definitely want to talk to you about your guitar building history and how you build guitars and what got you into it, etc. But Ty suggested we got you on today because of your interest in woods and tonewood in particular. So yeah. I thought we might start a bit backwards and start with that, if that's all right with you.
Can I just give a warning? Because I know this guy. So it's very possible that he could talk for, all right, on average, for a 1 hour discussion, you might get 4 questions in. So I'm just, maybe the 4 of us, that as he starts going, like, what's the sign going to be? Do we all grab our coffee at the same time? Or we're going to need to let him know, literally, like, all right, wrap it up.
Well, maybe we leave it to you two. But actually, I put links for all of us in the description below. But I put a link to your website, Arran.
Cool.
And part of your website's dedicated to the dark cypress wood.
Right, the dark forest cypress, which has been in tandem with my, journey into lutherie. And I kind of, I think somewhere out there's a YouTube video, Finding My Voice, where I kind of talk about, voicing instruments and that type of thing with acoustics. And the idea, I wanted to start building guitars. And at the same time, I was running a sawmill, and we had a river reclamation program. And I had been aware of, but never to a hands-on to the point that I ended up with at the mill, with Sinker Cypress. And so as I learned more about the world of lutherie and boutique guitar building, a big, as you said earlier, my children are my priority. And I wanted to ensure that if I transitioned from the furniture, restaurant, brewery, woodworking world, which is what my business has thrived on for over a decade, that I could feed everybody. And I didn't want to spend, 20 years trying to, I wanted to be able to have guitars that caught your eye, were something different, so that I could hopefully have sales fairly quickly. And my thoughts were that this green river-aged cypress, or water-aged, because sometimes it's lakes, would be a neat hook and something cool. And so for a few years, I did research and was doing everything just to see the viability of the species before I decided to make a shift over into something, fingers crossed, that it would actually be a decent material and create a decent sound, because it had not been used. I found a couple of people, but it was very, very minimal use. 6
You're
instruments.
saying that it was a wood you were using a lot with furniture, or it was just something that was coincidentally being used?
In South Carolina, we've got, and in the Southeast, we've got a pretty good river reclamation industry for things like heart pine and old growth cypress, because the eastern seaboard colonized for old growth timber. All that timber at the time was floated in rivers, and a lot of it sunk. And now, since we're in second and third growth forests, if you want dense heartwood, heart pine, like there's not stands of it. So people are diving for it to make flooring and cabinetry and trim and tables and whatever out of it. And that's all it has been utilized for since people started using the river reclaimed stuff. And further research, gave a good reason as to why. When the big boys started switching World War II-ish over, away from the Adirondack spruce to Sitka, it's like, well, why didn't they use cypress if it's a viable tonewood? And the wood, the forest, the old growth forest, were essentially gone by about 1905. So they were already, 50 years in the grave. So there wouldn't even have been an opportunity for them to utilize it as a species. I mean, there were stands of it, but because it's a water-loving species, like, it's not easy to log. So it was just, it was never utilized. And I was kind of just, I was looking at a 6-foot wide heart slab one day in the middle of the summer at the mill, just getting out of the weather. And all I could see was guitar tops. And that's what kind of got me thinking, is 6 feet wide.
That's a big guitar, bud.
Yeah. And, from there, just reaching out around the world and around the country to people that were considered, successful luthiers, I guess, that were good at their job, that I could get in touch with to send samples and say, hey, is this a good idea? What are your thoughts? And start dialing in within the species. Obviously we don't want 4 rings an inch, but if I've found some material that's actually, Ty has some that's 65 to 85 rings an inch. And when you get that dense, you're looking at a lot more, late growth as opposed to early growth. So the weight of the soundboard changes, its flexibility changes, so outside of my knowledge of wood, it was an area that I didn't know about, with acoustic properties and what you look for in good soundboard material. So,
all right, I gotta pause you right there. Here's the first thing. This is more of a statement than a question. Number one, I normally jump on this YouTube thing every week as I'm getting the kids ready for school, and I typically only comment with how many out of how many actually have beards. And it turns out this week we're at a perfect 5 for 5, which is, I don't know if there's been a better like completion rate as far as I'm concerned. 5 for 5 on beards this week. Just a huge thumbs up to everyone. I mean, this is great. Thank you.
If things hadn't gone wrong with my audio at the beginning, the intro was all about beards.
Yeah, I mean, it's 5 for 5. Well done, everybody. Congratulations. Arran, did you, because I got some doozy questions, actually, I want to ask you. But I'm not. What's that, Scott?
I'm still stuck on 6 feet.
So the first doozy question is, and then I'm going to get into the real doozies. This is a layup. When you think of acoustics, which I don't know if it's fair to say for this group, but my assumption is, maybe I'm speaking for myself, I think anyone that typically builds electric guitars always aspires to be a builder of an acoustic. Like, oh man, at some point, maybe I'll try to do that. Do I have to get tools? Everything has to change in my shop. I have to get bending forms, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. Did you get a lot of pushback from the typical acoustic builders that love the Sitka spruces, the moon spruces, the you name it, all the normal things? Did you, or the people that you said, hey, here, what do you think about this? What's the reception, or what was the reception, and what's the reception now of this?
Well, so on the biggest concern is the species within the parameters of your typical long-term industry used conifer topwoods, because bald cypress, Taxodium distichum, is a conifer. It is a deciduous conifer. It drops its needles. But where does it fall within that range? Was the first thing. And did it fall? And there's on my website, the DFC page, there is a little spreadsheet that I put up that has industry standard comparison data, for density, hardness, all of that kind of stuff. And it's a plus minus scale to just see if the species itself would fall within the range. And so from there, I said, okay, that works. It does fall within parameters of used topwood. So we're not going to be, and there are a bunch of hardwood tops or hardwoods that are used for tops, but that's not what I was looking at. The data sheet has a lower bar that shows some industry hardwoods that are used just for comparison data. And I sent to people that I hoped and that as I understood it were open-minded and had built with a large diversity of materials, so that I'm not shooting myself in the foot sending material to people that are automatically going to be like, no, it has to be Sitka spruce logged at this, blah, 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 blah. Because when you go to build, yeah, there you go. When you go to build, and if you go to the Dark Forest DFC story and scroll down, I don't know that that'll blow up on there from the top menu. Yeah, DFC story. There you go. And scroll down.
Oh, there it is.
There it is. So, everybody wants to compare to spruce, but then if you look at people's building portfolios, if they build with other stuff, cedar and redwood, then, at least they're open-minded to understanding that if you look at this wood to be spruce, you're going to be disappointed. It's not spruce. We have a diverse array of spruces to use, but then we also have Western red and redwood and, all these, and like Douglas fir, and the other species that are listed. And so you have to be open-minded that this is going to give you a different tonal palette, and it's going to have different working properties, because it is a little heavier, it is a little denser, and that I feel like can, put people off a little bit, be fearful, because once you dial in, your process and your equation to get your sound with known, known factors, if you start changing the equation, you don't want to put 200, 300 hours into a guitar and then go, I made it. It's not what I wanted.
Can I just interrupt a second there, Arran?
Yeah, sorry.
For someone that doesn't build acoustic guitars, looking at this data, and you're talking about people that build acoustic not wanting to put time into something, how can you tell in advance what the sound's going to be like? Is it just simply you're saying, oh, the figures are similar to this wood, therefore it's going to be like that? Or do you know like that the dried weight means this tonally in the
well, so that is where the people who have built 100 guitars, 50 guitars, I am in the process of teaching myself guitar building. I don't have a luthier community here, and trying to get out of the furniture world, a lifetime love of woods and being around building and furniture making and music. I started playing music when I was 5 or 6. I am educated in a certain way. I've built one guitar. I have 3 that I'm building, and I'm offering the Dark Forest Cypress based off of industry feedback, and to help afford me the time, because like if I take on a build, my small shop is completely full of tables or whatever the job might be, and I'm not pulling guitars out to do that. So the hope is that getting the species out there and selling it affords me the opportunity to get back to building, which is the goal. The goal is to build guitars. I feel like all of the factors that go into it, from design aesthetics to the sound created to the combination of the woods, just everything from a woodworker's aspect, it satisfies so many phenomenal creative endeavors and just different parts of, creative nature. And it's so complex that it's just awesome. And that's something in my experience with what drove my my business was that, tables are great and all that stuff's great, but this I like this. This is really, really difficult, and I like a challenge. So the hope is to be able to, and I'm there. This is the first year that I'm in the middle of processing right now. And once I've gotten through a chunk of processing material, I should be able to get back to building.
But the big question, how do they sound?
Awesome. I'm really lucky with the people that I've reached out to.
Don't use like the acoustic. Oh, it's got a booming bass. Blah blah blah. Right. Don't use like all those fancy acoustic terms people use in describing it. Like, give us the real deal.
It sounds really good, and the wood has the ability. And this is from people that are not building $500. And granted, this is my garage, but not building $500 guitars. The wood has the ability to push it to wherever you want it to. And that makes me super happy.
Is that based on, forgive my acoustic ignorance, is that based on bracing patterns? Is that based on how thin you make the top or how thick you make the braces? Yeah, like, is it all dependent upon that stuff that I don't know how to do?
Right.
Is that really? Okay.
It has the ability to do delicate, subtle, nuanced stuff. So not like your fella standing up, doing some heavy strumming. And that is what gives you a sound from the instrument. This can be delicately played and produce a nice full sound. But then it can also be played a little harder with a pick and you not reach the outer edge of the soundboard's capabilities. So it's got a very wide, spectrum. It's all about what you as a builder are looking to push the wood. And some woods can't go this way, and this wood from the industry feedback can go any way that you want it. And that's just, it's nice.
One thing that I find interesting about it from just looking at the images is it looks so different. So even if the guitar looks a similar shape to hundreds of other acoustic guitars, that color of the wood is something that feels very different to me, or looks very different.
Actually, Arran, I was lucky when I had only met, just like all of you knuckleheads, I only had met Arran virtually until I got to NAMM this year, and he was actually there with the Santa Cruz Guitar Company. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Arran, is that where you were? So they've used some of his Dark Forest stuff on a couple of like their crazy high-end builds. One was so cool that, and you guys will appreciate this, that every single fret had a mother of pearl inlay in it. Like every single, it was stunning.
6 foot. Really?
What he had there, which I thought was really cool, and maybe you can just touch on this, is that color that's very distinctive. He also had a variety, I'm going to say 7 or 8 different versions of that same color, from a lighter to the really, really dark. And if you could, Arran, maybe just talk to the how. Oh, look at that. He's gone away. He gave up. Maybe just talk to the how or why, and just so I understand it. Is it all based on age?
It's based on submersion time. We're in South Carolina, we're the Piedmont, the Low Country, and I consider it's kind of like the filter basket of the Appalachian Mountains. And we've got all these tributaries and waterways coming down through the state from the mountains. Through the middle of the state, there's a big clay band of red clay that runs through the state. So we've got a lot of iron up there. And as the water comes down from the mountains and picks up all the organic material and all the breakdown, because we don't have, we've got some decent rivers, but they're all typically kind of slow and low flowing. And if you're in a clearer area and you put your hand down in the river, it gets orange red and it darkens due to the iron in the water and all of the natural decomposition. And different waterways in the state are different, but they're all dark. It's not crystal clear water. So some waterways are super heavy, some are not, depending on where these logs come from. They might pick it up a little bit quicker, but that's also super determined by the log itself. Is it hollow? Does it have some heart rot to it? Is it a pecky log? And so the material, and this isn't brand new colored, but this is pretty close to color. So if you look at that, that's a good representation of bald cypress. But then you see the mineral streaking in it. So this was an axe cut that was submerged for probably 150 years. Not a really long submersion time relative to the material that I have. And so the longer, if the heart's solid, then the water goes in and goes out, goes in and goes out, kind of like the way a barrel stave works. And over time, it slowly penetrates, completely discoloring the log. If the log is hollow, it does it from two sides. And so you can get super dark material. And like what Ty has the tree had an infection. It's a pecky. And it comes in from the needle tips, works its way down through the branches, hollowing out. If you think of the feeder system of a tree as the vascular system, it slowly eats out the vascular system, eventually killing the tree, and the tree falls over. So if one of those goes into the water, it'll get super dark. Yeah, see? So he's doing that top, and the pecky fell for his F-holes. But that will eventually hollow the log out. And then you can get all the way up to that color, where this was submerged for 3,758 years. And my lighting isn't, I don't have my spray, but it's pretty dark.
See, this is what I was talking about a few weeks ago. Acoustic builders are like, I don't know, NASA employees, where us doing electric builds are more like cavemen who are just sticking stuff together.
For sure. I was about to say, thank God I don't build acoustic guitars.
Right.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah. It looks
So-
like a
so that- I
complicated
guess
spreadsheet
that's-
to work out how to build one.
So then there's the first zinger of the question. As an electric builder, does tonewood or this cool stuff, does it even friggin' matter?
Do we want
I'm
to go
gonna
there?
I'm going to jump
Mark
in
wants to answer that.
and say
No.
that what matters to me, if I was building an electric guitar with this guitar, is I can say it's a bit of wood that's been submerged for 3,000 years. That's
Like the
That idea.
Fenland the Fenland bog oak that you have in your area, Daniel.
I mean, it's older than America. Older
Yeah.
than America. If you know what I mean.
By an order of magnitude.
Yeah.
So, Aaron, what are
Sorry,
your
I didn't
thoughts?
interrupt the
You're
Tonewood
you're one of those hoity-toity acoustic builders. For us cavemen, as Scott so clearly defined us, and
Well,
Mark giggled very appropriately. Does it matter?
So I think Daniel or whoever I think Daniel mentioned you mentioned the bog oak. oak is an open pored wood. It dampens. It isn't one that you would automatically think of as a fantastic tone wood. But like my buddy Tom Sands, he built with the dark forest cypress, and he designed the guitar with the customer, and he built a beautiful instrument named Faye, and he used the bog oak. And when it comes to the build, at the end of the day, what tone are you looking for? What visually are you looking for? And if 10,000 people say it's crap and you absolutely love it, that's all that matters. And, you know, the lady he built the guitar for loves it. And despite the species itself, now that, you know, the longer you submerge, this oak is borderline, you know, coming up on close to wanting to fossilize. So I've never held any bog oak, but I imagine it's harder. And it's also, I think a lot of it is like, I think what Tom used was English brown oak that had been in a bog. And I've never held that. So I can't compare it to like my live oaks, my red oaks, my water oaks that I have here. But when the artist Katie Spencer plays it, and I think Tom has they shot a video, I think it, should be out soon. She is a finger picker, and she's a delicate player, and it sounds phenomenal. So that's partly, you know, a lot of that's Tom's ability to pull what he wants out of the guitar, and the wood itself. But I think, man, if it makes the customer happy and it makes you happy, it doesn't matter. If it does its job, you know, it doesn't matter. We've got to get away from these preconceived notions that it's got to be this. That's why the forests are gone. It's got to be this.
Yeah,
I've been saying for a long time, guitar people are dumb. I hadn't considered the acoustic world, but one of the first things that you mentioned made me think about swamp ash, which I've never looked into
Electric
the
bodies.
details of what the difference is between swamp ash and ash. I assumed it was, you know, sitting in a swamp for a long time, and I didn't think about how constant inundation with water would make a difference. But it was, and I don't know that I've ever touched swamp ash, but it was my understanding that stuff was pretty light, like basswood almost. But
it's like, actually, because, you know, being in the Northeast, you can get ash, like it's everywhere, because all the trees are dying because of these boar beetles, I think. Yeah, like and like towns are just cutting them down left and right because they're dying. I think I even heard within the next 10 years they'll be gone. Like the eastern ash, like the hard ash, will be gone. It is probably, and I don't know, I'm sure there's data somewhere. I'll bet you I bet you swamp ash is half as light, but also, like, and you're talking about like how it grows in the east. Obviously, northeast, the growing conditions are harsher. The rings are a lot tighter. The wood's a lot denser. You get in the south, when you get the swamp ash, there's a lot more water, a lot more pleasant conditions, and it grows faster. That's why, like, I know, Scott, like some of your guitar bodies, when you do like that ceruse finish on it, the grain lines are pretty spread out. That means that tree was growing quick as hell. You know, each of those rings is another year's growth, for crying out loud.
I've noticed most of the things that I can get are obviously what's the word? They're fast grown. So like plantation or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, Ty mentioned in the regional aspect of it, that's been another thing. You know, we think that soundboard material has to come off the top of a mountain nowadays. Like it's got to be at 17,000, you know, feet altitude, and it's got to be harvested at this time, and
right below the growth, the place where, or the altitude where trees can actually grow. If it's not right on that border, then shame on you. Yeah.
But I understand that, you know, a master luthier passing on knowledge generationally over the centuries, and not, you know, coming from violin making world like Richard Hoover, Santa Cruz Guitars, was trained by a violin maker to then learn acoustic guitars, and for 50 years he's built some of the best acoustic guitars out there. But when you talk about the transfer of knowledge, you know, in industries, there's the weird thing of, I've got this secret and I'm not going to tell you the recipe. And it's, you know, and unless you do the apprenticeship with me for 17 years, then right before I die, I'll give it to you. You know, we get held onto these things because of our ties to history and, you know, everything that comes tradition. But a lot of certain traditions have their roots in unsustainable methods. Yeah. Hence the deforestation and all of this. And so when you get outside without zooming in your focus and really reading and understanding, if you start to generically take summarizing cliff notes and all of this from decades and decades and decades, suddenly we find ourselves, it's got to be exotic wood, and it has to be grown in the north in the cold. And for a tone wood, like a top wood, it doesn't like water. Well, Sitka spruce likes water. It loves growing next to water. You know, if we live in here, you know, like where where I live in the US, if I want exotic wood, I go to South America, or I go to Africa, or I go to Europe. Yep. But what about y'all? If you want exotic wood, the sycamore or the maple that I have here is exotic to you. And if the tree has the, like Ty was talking about, the ring density for the known quantities, value quantities within a species, you know, then it's going to potentially work. Everybody says that, you know, tonewood doesn't come from the South, but I don't remember if it was in a documentary or one of the Big Red Book articles that the American Luthiers Guild puts out. But somebody was talking about the purchase orders of Martin around World War II, and showing them buying spruce from Georgia. And that, you know, and we everybody's after these pre-war Martins. Well, you know, they were getting spruce from there. So you can't tell me that some of the most sought after, you know, Martin guitars in the world, it's, you know, so that overcoming these type of things, that factory situations having to sell large volumes of products and taking factors out of equations to make the whole process easier, is a big step to overcome, to get out of you know, preconceived, you know, mindsets of what we can and can't do. Because at the end of the day, do what the hell you want to do. If the body doesn't have the weight to it, then, you know, put a little bit of lead in there. If the neck isn't as heavy, put a little lead in the headstock, something like that, to whatever needs to happen to get the sound that you're looking for. But, you know, just try and be aware that
I thought your point about the historic
top wood is crazy.
Sorry to interrupt. I thought your point about the historic reason we're using the woods is so interesting. We had Miles McNally on quite a while ago, like episode 15, and he had a collection of instruments, stringed instruments from around the world. And a lot of those are just made in the way they're made because that's what people had access to. Yeah. And now that's become the traditional way to make it. And therefore that's what people think we have to do. And we have this conversation all the time about, for electric guitars, about the design, not necessarily the wood, but it's made in this shape or bolted on in this way because that's how the pioneers of the instrument did it, and therefore that's the right way to do it.
Right. And there's, like, in the classical world, there is, and that's something that pops up. I love to read, and, you know, I especially with
remember, Aaron, you're dealing with cavemen, so go ahead.
With not having a community here, but then also I love history. You know, I love history. When I started reading, or when I started delving into the luthier world, I went back to like the 1950s and started reading any book that was published forward to see what was the industry standard then, how it has evolved over the decades, up to reading, you know, modern books, and how, just so that I can get the best grasp that I can, since I'm not working next to a luthier every day, to give me the best overall knowledge of everything. And one thing that consistently came up through all the books where classicals are mentioned is the resistance by the artists to not want to use other than the predetermined backs and sides, whether it was a negra or a blanco, I think a white or black. And that resistance is really hard to overcome, but they're also coming from a classical music world, which is steeped in centuries, of tradition and it having to be done a certain way. And it's just really, really hard because, when those traditions came about, there was a lot of materials and there was a lot of stuff, but it was very, very, like Daniel said, very, very localized to the development of the instruments. But if that happened there for 100 years, if that instrument then was transplanted, because this is what it is, it has to be this from over here. And it just, it's getting everybody on the same page to try and make sure that the resources are there. And I don't mean to keep hitting sustainability, but I do keep hitting sustainability, because that's one of the things with the dark forest cypress. And, it's not, there are two old growth stands of bald cypress, Taxodium distichum, left. And one is in South Carolina, about an hour and a half from my house. It's Congaree National Forest, and then the Blackwater Reserve. And there's a dendrochronologist named David Staley at a University of Arkansas who is working really, really hard to conserve these stands. One of the trees in Congaree National Forest, perfectly healthy, rolling along, he did a ring study on it. It's 2,600 years old. And in order for us to have the ecological benefits of forests like that, we've got to quit cutting everything down. And then you look at the industry of sinker reclamation and you say, well, how are you getting the logs? You just going into the river and pulling all the logs out and seeing which one's good. And, and aren't you just kind of messing up the microclimate of that area? And you can change rivers. You can change the path of a river. If you go into where 600 logs are stuck in a turn and have caused the river to turn, and you pull all 600 logs out, you've created a massive vacant space in a waterway, and that is going to turn. There's a cool riverboat that wrecked on a sandbar in the 1800s that changed the path of the Missouri River, that was then found in the 1970s by a farmer in a field tilling his field, and he hit the top of it. And that's a great example. And South Carolina, we have strict legislation in place to help, kind of limit how much material is being pulled. I don't think it's the same in Georgia and Florida. I know Georgia, you can just go pull whatever you want. But what we're after with the dark forest cypress, and I don't dive, I get crazy. I can't even ride the teacup rides with the kids. I can't look at them. I get sick. But I have a diver who is been doing it for a long time. It's really, really good. And I have no idea how they do it underwater when you can't see, everything's by touch, finding quality logs that are covered in sediment and have been in some cases for, 1,800 years. But we do very, very select logging. He'll find a log. It has to meet certain criteria and certain parameters. We don't disclose information of where, specifics of where logs come from. But part of the crazy thing is that, how many logs are ancient, because a large portion of the material that I have is ancient material, and that's 1,500 years or more that the log has been submerged. So we go in, we try to meet parameters, get a log up, and then we have to decide, is it a viable tonewood log? But it's typically as minimal impact as possible to get the log. And then still, even, if a canopy was moderately open when one of these, like the green set that I showed you, that tree was 1,000 when it fell. And the exterior of the log showed no pin knots, no anything. So it looked like a perfect log. And when I started breaking it down, it turns out that the canopy of the forest closed, 400 years or so before the tree fell. And so this far into the tree, pin nuts stop. So what seemed to be a log that the trees grow to 160 or 180 feet, and there was about 50 usable feet of this log left after 4,000 years of being submerged. What seemed to be a good amount of material to come out of it, the more I break it down, the more I find this band where the canopy closed, and small growth that had been trying to become limbs died off, and it's made it not have as high of a yield of perfect material.
So I've got some questions about that.
Sorry,
To
yeah.
interrupt. First
And
of
I
all,
do
you
this.
said. First of all, you said when you take a log out, you want to determine if it's a tonewood.
Yeah.
And so you can see on site whether it's potentially going to be useful or not. So is the implication if it's not, you just put it back?
Yeah.
Right. And then when you take it away and you find
And
things-
typically it's like a lift to try and get up, look at it, or depending on what the water's doing, because our water does run clear sometimes. It's making sure it's hollow or not hollow, making sure, we like root ball, and making sure that the tree grew fairly straight. And if you've ever looked at a log or firewood drying, waiting from green to be resplit or split, you see the medullary rays cracking on the end grain, but you can also see them down the side of the log. Now that happens in sapwood and that happens in heartwood. Typically, ancient logs, the sapwood rots off. It turns to like styrofoam and it gets all crazy. It doesn't display as well as medullary rays exposing themselves in heartwood. But you can look at those cracks because the log is curing underwater. You can look at those cracks and see if the cracks run down the length of the log, then the log grew straight. If there's a big roll and a twist to these, then the log grew rotating with the sun based off of exposure and other stuff. If a storm comes through and knocks a chunk of trees down and exposes light on this side of the forest, then that tree is going to rotate and turn and grow more consistently towards that. And there's some really cool, there's a forest out, a redwood forest outside of Santa Cruz that Richard Hoover took me to. And the trees, some of the big, massive redwoods that are there, were left when they clear cut, or that was a preserve, but they had been going through and cutting. Some of the biggest trees that are left, if you look at them, you can see this rotation in their growth. And you know that would never make good lumber. Now, these trees are massive, and I don't know why those trees necessarily were left. But when you look at that, you can literally see it on the exterior of these massive redwoods. It's pretty cool.
That's so fascinating.
I mean, where can you, outside of you working with a diver, you having Sawyer experience, you milling this stuff up, you doing the research, can any old knucklehead go find this wood somewhere else?
Well, so sinker is very prevalent, but it takes a crazy kind of nut job to attempt this. Sinker cypress, cypress itself is a super durable and bug and rot resistant material. Sinker cypress isn't, depending on the submersion time, the longer it's submerged, once you start breaking it down, the more problematic it is to process. It loves to surface check really quickly. And when you're working with material that's 1/4 of an inch thick, I roughly saw, we'll say that's what I saw it to, it'll destroy itself really quickly. And that's been one thing that over the years working on doesn't do well. Now, luckily I reached out when I started doing this to Brent at Alaskan Specialty Woods that had found the ancient Sitka, and said, okay, what was your process? What do you, and it, how did you do all of this? Because some of the first material I got, I did industry standard, chop it to 2 foot, split it into bolts, paint the ends, stack it out of the weather, let it sit for years. Every single one of those bolts, it has at least a 30% loss due to surface checking. And there's no wind on them. There's nothing like and Brent said, no, don't cut it. Don't set that stuff up. And so you have to process it quickly or you start getting a quick loss. Additionally, there is a type, depending on how deep into bald cypress you want to go, it grows on the edge of water, it grows in tidal water areas, or it grows in dry land, or it grows in standing water. Some people will call it pond cypress or tidewater cypress. It has a definitive different feel and hardness to it.
But could I get one of these tops anywhere else?
No. Not that
remember, guys, I told you you got to really hone him in sometimes because he'll go on.
Because
he thinks about this stuff all day long and just can't wait for a bunch of us knuckleheads to get on here so he can just spew all of this knowledge.
Well, the problem is it's interesting to listen to. So keep going.
Well,
but that was one of the big things initially was taking, over a dozen different logs that had displayed an array of different properties and saying, which is it? What are we looking for? And the tidewater cypress, it would be, back inside material. It's god awful hard. But it's heavy too. And that's not what I was looking for in this endeavor. And that's not the material that I have an abundance of. I was looking for it as a topwood because we have a ton of different back and side materials that are coming up in the hardwood world that are starting to make their way. You've got Catalosh and Zircote and Choctaviga and Choctacaca and all of these other things. But the conifer topwoods are not. They're just, the species aren't there. I know King Billy Pine in Australia is one that people have tried to push, but it just doesn't quite get there. And we have such an abundance of the sinker material that just trying to come up with another alternative to give the industry, because the forestry, the people that are cutting these forests down they're not thinking about 300 years. They're thinking in 80-year cycles. They're thinking in 40-year cycles. And these big, beautiful trees that could give us tonewood out of the spruces are getting turned into toilet paper and building materials. And,
So that leads me to another question. You're looking for the bits that are suitable for tonewood.
Yeah.
The bits that aren't, what happens to them? If you're cutting up, like you said, you've got a piece, you're cutting up and you find the, I can't remember what you called it, the pine knots in that, and it's now not suitable, that part of the log, for tonewood. Are you giving it to some other industry to use? Is there another
No.
way?
So when I first started researching all of this, I was at the mill and I was hoping to, because we were short staffed, we already did everything by hand with long-term air drying just because we were short staffed. I was hoping to switch the mill to add another product line and produce some tonewoods. We had 32 different species on site with subspecies. And so I was able to take an array of material. The owner let me go down my rabbit hole and take an array of material from different logs to start the research process. So in all of that initial phase work is where I took small amounts, and small amounts being, 40 board feet or so of these logs that, based off of research, were good cuts to then take material from, because they were all plain sawn. Now I know what I'm looking for in the logs. So when it comes to breaking it down, if there's pin knots in there, that goes to a whole nother part of the acoustic world. Joy Guitars at NAMM had a ancient Sitka guitar that had 4 pin knots on it. Tom Sand's guitar, Faye, and there's a picture, Daniel, in my friends section of Tom's guitar. he and Katie chose the top, and she liked that it was different. The pin knots are up above the sound hole, and don't affect a whole lot of down in the lower bout. Yeah, there you can see it right there. Joy Guitars, his were pretty much laid out kind of on braces. So depending on your bracing pattern, if you're tying it to the top and it's under the bridge or something like that, then the material should be viable. But again, it goes to what sound are you trying to make,
Yes. So it's not wasted, is what.
Right. I saw everything into tops. I keep waste. I keep too much of the waste.
Like all of us people that build guitars.
Right. But I'm doing it in
or
log form,
do woodworking
and my
in
waste
general.
piles are enormous. With breaking these wedges down and finding pockets of rot and this other stuff. And I've got waste all the way down to ukulele stuff. And I have a huge amount of stuff that I haven't even sawn up from this current log of ukulele material, just because I'm trying to focus on guitars, because that's what I'm shooting for. But anything that material that could do 4-piece tops. I think Pacific Rim just did a post, or it's on their website, about 4-piece tops. Just trying to utilize the materials. And if you build it correctly, I think Irvin Samaji's 500th guitar, the back was 500 pieces of ebony or something crazy. And, we're told it's got to be a center seam. You can't. Well, it's crap. Just build it right, and understand the limitations of what you're doing with how you're building it and how you're assembling it.
So that's pretty funny. I don't know if you can see that question that came up there, Aaron, about how much does the density. I don't even know what those words mean.
Oh, wait,
grams
there's
per
been
centimeter
questions.
cubed.
Oh, sorry.
Do you feel, how much does the density, grams per centimeter cubed, do you feel affects the sound?
That I don't know. I am not educated enough to try and answer
you
that
fit
question.
it. You fit in with this group perfectly then. So, I just want to say something. So I'll tell a quick story if I may. So I had met Arran. I had seen a video of him talking about this stuff, and I don't know if it was on Instagram or YouTube or something. And if you guys aren't getting a sense of it, like just his, not to sound corny, his passion for this shit is pretty cool. It's like the fact that he's trying to do these things, do it the right way, understands all the inner workings of, he's done his industry research. I was just like, holy cow, this is interesting. And I just shot him a genuine message thinking this guy's never going to even respond, like saying, dude, thank you for this. This was actually pretty cool.
And now he regrets it because I bug him all the time.
Jesus. But that all being said, but like him and I were talking, and I told him before I went to NAMM, and I knew he'd be there. I'm like, man, I'm looking for something, because we were talking about Pecky Cypress, and we talked about it briefly. Pecky's the thing that it starts at the canopy, it works its way down into the tree, and I think a lot of people have seen Pecky Cypress, where typical examples of it, there's just like these big holes all over this wood. And I said, I'm looking for something very specific, and I'm hoping I can find it. I want to do a guitar where the Pecky holes almost automatically align with where the sound holes would be. And that's that's the top that I showed earlier. And he goes, I got a billet of Pecky Cypress. Who knows? Cut it open. Let's see what happens. And of course, I was the only goofball walking around NAMM with a billet of wood in my backpack, which is also kind of embarrassing, not for me, but if you think of how many guitar builders are at NAMM, like it's an ocean of guitars, yet I was the only person there that was thinking about my next build and like, hey, what a good place to start sourcing materials other than a place where a bunch of people build guitars. So I'm literally walking around with a billet in my backpack. Anyways, as I cut into it, I'm like, holy shit, it is exactly what I was looking for. It is, the holes are perfect. I'm going to do my typical F holes around it. And whether what's the best way to say this? Whether it's, I mean, I'm a guitar builder. I pick top woods, and I think someone had mentioned this in a comment earlier. I think Chris Franklin from Franklin Guitars mentioned this. I like to do what I think a lot of people do. Yeah, I like unusual stuff. I like to build with unusual stuff. But I'm always trying to build with something that, listen, a guitar is a prop for a lot of players. Like we build guitars, we use quilted maple and flame maple because one, it looks friggin' cool.
Mhm.
And a guitar player standing up on stage, sure, you can be the guy that's got the 52 Telly that has got that vintage provenance, if you will. Those of us that don't have that, we try to build things that just look stinking cool. And for me, when I saw those two holes and it opened up perfectly, I'm like, holy shit, I've never seen another guitar like this. This is going to look cool, and it's got a story to it. Like the fact that when the guy that got, ordered this guitar for me, when he sees this thing and I'm able to say, this is an axe cut log, it's Pecky Cypress, it's sat under the water for 150 years, I think Aaron told me. It's probably north of, if you count the rings, a tree that's been around for 1,000+ years or close to, or whatever the case would be. That's a cool friggin' story. And on top of that, it looks cool. I'm in. Like, I'm always trying to build something that just looks stinking cool. So that for me is why I got excited about this stuff. And I think you guys know, like, I don't dye a lot of guitars anymore. I love doing it. But there's something really cool about us wood snobs. No matter who we are. Even, Mark, you build an amazing guitar out of bamboo and Richlight. I hate to tell you, that looks stinking cool. You know what I mean? And if it didn't look cool, because you've got an aesthetic eye, you'd be the first one to say it doesn't look as cool as I wish it to be. I don't know, man. There's just something cool about this stuff, and that's just my little, I don't want to say pitch, but, us, a lot of us are electric guitar builders first. I think part of that always isn't just cutting up a piece of wood we get from the big box store and hoping it looks cool. We're picking stuff because it looks cool to start with. I don't know. What are your thoughts? I'll throw it to Scott and to Mark and see what you guys have to say about that stupid comment.
Well, we buy top sets, for $200 online. So, yeah. Well, but with electrics, like I've mentioned a few times, I remember watching Dylan Talks Tone screw a bridge to a picket fence to prove that tonewood was not a real thing for electrics. It's not something we worry about with electrics, but I'm a little blown away by it makes sense. I never thought about it. We talked about how electric players tend to be kind of cork sniffy about tellies, and it's all nostalgia and what they've seen for their entire lives. I hadn't thought about just how crazy it would get in the acoustic world, where things make so much more of a difference.
Yeah.
I wish I could remember what it was, and I've mentioned this before, but I remember seeing an interview with a dude that had a really small boutique kind of acoustic studio. It was doing like ultrasound on top sets to see how the bracings affected the acoustic patterns.
The modes. Yeah.
It was insane. And
patterns.
Yeah, and that just reinforces the fact that I'm just a caveman that's just sticking shit together. This is I've never had a whole lot of interest in doing acoustics until I saw somebody build a ukulele, and I thought maybe I could do that. But it's just a whole nother world.
Yeah. You know what? One thing I didn't mention, because I've mentioned several dates, like Tom's guitar, and then Daniel, you had pulled up Virgil for blind guitars, and there's a sound demo at the bottom of Virgil's page on my website. But those were built from the same log, and the log I radiocarbon date. And that log was radiocarbon dated to 1758 years and was about a 300-year-old log when it fell. And so we call it the Jesus log. And, you know, one crazy thing is when I started doing this, the idea was to introduce a new species, right? And so I took material like you saw the blonde honeyish colored stuff. I took some stuff that was green. I was, oh, this is cool. And I was running at the time years ago, I was running off of the information from the diver from the mill who randomly radiocarbon dated a couple of logs here and there. But his information that he conveyed to me was you get 2 to 4 inches of discoloration for every 200 or so years based off of the density of the log. And I said, well, okay, so that's good, but have you actually really put any effort into figuring that out? And then I eventually radiocarbon dated. And, you know, I did some social. Tom Sands actually pushed me to start selling it. I was concerned that Martin and Gibson were going to steal my thunder and get a log, and I would get buried and never be able to feed my kids. And so Tom pushed me to sell, and nobody. I listed stuff that was slightly discolored all the way to the darkest stuff that I had, and nobody cared at all about the stuff that wasn't discolored. They didn't, you know, not even an inquiry at all. And when I went to NAM as a support role for Santa Cruz, which was, you know, that was fantastic. I was there to answer questions and inform people about this new species. So like Ty said, I took a stack of about 12 tops that went from around 125, 150 year axe cut, no discoloration, all the way up to the 4,000 years. So I brought the rainbow possibilities of the material. And at NAM, people loved the dark stuff, right? But I also actually being able to interact with builders, because my social media reach is very small. And that's how I've been doing this. Because, you know, I'm one dude.
You're spending too much time reading.
Yeah, I'm one guy. I'm trying to make a living and take care of the family and everything. And I don't have an enormous budget to bring in a marketing company and social company. I'm going to do that. So I do everything myself, like so many other people. And at NAM, I got such good feedback on, you know, the full array of colors and everything. And like Ryan Guitars did put an order in, and they just got their material yesterday, and they got it at the 3:00 their time, and we had just finished dinner. I have a 7, a 5, and a 2-year-old, and they called to kind of go over everything and to tell me how excited they are. And I've got 2 naked kids running around. One's in the shower with a popsicle screaming because the popsicle's getting wet, and I'm just but they're super excited about the 363-year-old or 368-year-old material that has some light discoloring, as well as another company that is excited. They're unsure about how their customers would perceive the super dark stuff, so they're kind of toe in the water with some light discoloration. Or lightly discolored material to move forward with it. So I don't. That's yeah.
I mean, I've got to say, I've said this many times before. I used to hate electric guitars that just had a wooden finish because I'd only really seen like factory built ones. And when you see the boutique market where people like Scott and Ty are choosing the wood and specifically designing a guitar to fit around certain patterns in the wood, it totally transforms what the guitars look like. And you can see that kind of quality in it. So seeing a wood that looks different is exciting and different. And to be able to say, like, someone can say, I've got a 1959 or whatever Les Paul, and you can say, I've got a guitar that's as old as Christ or older than Christ. That's just a crazy kind of concept to think about.
And one cool thing is I can take, so from the bolt, I take them on to perfect quarter, and I put my grain correction out. On average, I've been breaking down 42-inch diameter logs. And I have some correction wedges, and that's what'll, eventually make, I'll saw up into a bunch more ukulele tops. But I'll take a, let's say, 2 5/8 inch billet and saw 5 tops out of it, and every single top looks different. And, in the spruce world, you want every single top to look exactly the same. And if this wasn't discolored, every single one of those 5, all 5 tops would look exactly the same, but that long-term submersion. So it's it's pretty cool coming off the saw, that every single time I drop a plate off the back of the outfeed, I'm like, ooh, what am I going to see? What am I going to see? What am I going to see?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I know that feeling. That's always cool. And how well does my book match up?
Yeah.
I do have to apologize. I do have to run. I actually have to take my kids to school. So I do. And I saw a break in Aaron's talking, and I knew I had to jump in at that opportunity. But before I go, I just wanted to say that I'm representing buddy Yergs today, the I Am Yergs. What's great about this shirt, I will say, is see that? Yeah, is that if I stand all the way up, because I'm a pretty tall fella, I'm 6'3", it ends up becoming like a half shirt, which is pretty awesome. If I stretch my arms up, I look like my daughter going to school with her little crop top type deals, which I'm good with. Anything to represent our buddy Yergs. So, anyways, Daniel, Mark, Bonehead, Scott, and Aaron, thank you guys. I apologize. You guys don't let up on him. You need to drill him some more, please. Don't let this fancy schmancy acoustic guy get away without drilling him some more. Please.
It's just the lighting. It's just my fancy.
Mark,
LED.
I see you shaking your head, and I haven't heard you attack him yet. Actually,
I
need. Okay, God, I got to put it on in the car, guys. Thank you. Cheers.
Right. Cheers, Ty.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one thing, if in regards to like the selling the material, I have never had an e-commerce store. I had an IT guy who had done an original website for me. He unfortunately couldn't continue, and the website went into limbo for a year. And end of last year, I made the new website, and realizing that social media sales are great and all, but wanting to be able to actually have a store where I don't have to be quite as hands-on and you can just go get a set. I set up the e-commerce store, and I'm using Squarespace, and I don't think it's necessary. Like when you go to some tonewood stores, they've got, you can scroll and scroll and scroll with these big companies. I don't think Squarespace is really it's not easy for me, who is not tech savvy, to get in there. So I set the store up initially with kind of sample pictures, and say, okay, you choose, like right now, I think there's 8 select steel string size tops available. And I listed it that way, and thinking it would be easier for the customer. And then I've just had this kind of nagging sensation that, due to the specific nature of each top, like I talked about a second ago, I really need to list every single one of them. So if anybody that's been watching this is going to the website, I am literally in the process of shooting 160 sets that I'm about to load into the website, all sizes and grades of guitar sizes, not ukuleles. I'm waiting on templates since LMI closed, and I saw it when LMI was coming. I was like, I need to get some acrylic templates so I can wiggle them around and I don't have to make them. And I didn't get them. So I'm working on making those templates to be able to then, maximize. Because again, and if you ever order a top, I break the log down based off the length of the log. A round section of the log might be 23 to 27 inches long. And throughout the whole process, all the way to finished set, I try and leave them absolutely as intact as possible, because you as the builder might like a wormhole, you might like a rot spot, you might like whatever it is. So if you ever order, it's literally how the sets are, how they come from breakdown. And I try not to edge stuff. I'll join for processing, for breaking down and everything, but I hope to have that loaded up, into the website by next week. And I've got a newsletter you can sign up for, and I'll send an alert out via that before, like the day before I list everything.
I forgot LMI went down.
Yeah. And I was like, I need templates. And then I didn't get them. Is there anything I've missed? I know I bounce a lot, but
I bet there's a world of information that'd be fascinating to hear that we don't have a clue to even ask about.
Well, one thing I want to try to do is I'll share this. We had on a few weeks ago Willis Howard, who is part of a luthier group in America that all make acoustic guitars. So definitely this seems like the perfect video to share with them. So if anyone's watching and is part of a forum or a group of acoustic builders or knows people, please do share it that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm intrigued by the tops just for like not acoustic guitars, as we've said, like with Ty.
Right. Yeah, and so that's something else I'm working on. If people, so like Ty likes thicker stock, and this super old stuff. The way I'm breaking, I'm not sawing slabs and then pulling the heart slabs out. I'm breaking it down traditional tonewood wise, and if I somehow during rough breakdown get off of perfect quarter with no run out, I can adjust it in a wedge form or in bolt form as I am doing stuff based off of those medullary rays. But I have a very, very brief window, typically a few days, that if I take a wedge down to a squared billet and set it in the shop, that I'll start getting cracks. And if you follow Kimball Hardwoods, because I have people that request archtop material. I know if you're going to do a hollow body, like Ty likes to finish out, I think at a 1/4 inch thick for his semi hollows. I need to cut a little bit thicker, or I need to, I'd like to be able to offer a little bit thicker chunks, but I also don't want to send you something with cracks. And Derek Kimball, for his highly figured maples, does his chest freezer process. And it's a gentle water removal process where he freezes it and then thaws it and freezes it and thaws it. And so trying to make my way over into a little bit thicker stock for electrics is, part of the plan. It's just how to do it. And I don't want to have to cut a 14-inch chunk and hope that I get 8.5 and that the crack falls wherever, because it's literally based off of tension, and the more mass there is, the more strength it has to pull itself apart and cause these little checks. So and I also, the day that I get it into squared form, I've got to get it onto sticks, and if I hesitate, I can have loss, and that's another reason to keep them larger, because I don't want to waste the material, and that's the main thing. Like the materials lasted for all this time, and so it's a balancing act.
I was going to ask how you manage all that checking. How do you keep it from happening?
No airflow. Air can't touch it, but I've got to be dehumidifying, and I do it in the shop. So in round form, I water my portions and I keep them tarped until I bring them into the shop. And then once I bring them into the shop, I give myself I'll do it in stages. I clean up the wedge and get it to a rough shape to then break down. And when I get a stack of squared billets that I hit 50 sets, then I go ahead and saw them and sticker them. And what I try to time things to do that in a day. But if I get to the end of the day and I've got enough for 50 sets, I flat stack them and cover them. And so no air on them. And then first thing in the morning, I start sawing.
Is it drying too fast?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
so the quicker I can get it into small, thin pieces, the less likely it is to want to tear itself apart. Like live oak that we have here, we used to do a lot of at the mill. And when you would saw those logs, you'd literally have to like plan, okay, we've got 2 hours. We're going to saw this log, get it onto sticks, get it completely out of the sun, out of the wind, out of the weather, get it weighted down, put a bunch of stuff on top of the pack, and then still hope that that wood doesn't twist, kick, crack, and explode. And that was, I ran the kilns at the mill too. And we had a vacuum kiln and a dry kiln. And some of our local species like live oak, pignut hickory, which is gorgeous, are not readily processed by big industry because you can't really take them above 135 degrees. They explode. And, smaller facilities have a better capability to do custom drying processes. They're not doing, freight car loads of materials. But even the way I used to run the kilns is, and maybe it's my Southern heritage, I would do it like barbecue, low and slow, give the water, it doesn't need to be a 2-week cycle. It can be 4 weeks. It can be 6 weeks, whatever gives us the least loss. And that's responsible from a financial perspective, because if you're cracking and destroying material, you can't sell it, or you have to sell it at a lower price. But then you're also not being responsible with the resource that you're lucky enough to be processing. And so that is the main goal in the entire thing. So I won't cut portions from logs until I'm ready to process them. They stay in log form, covered and wet. And then when they go into rounds and I start that process, I still keep them wet. I still keep them covered. Yeah.
The science behind all that is just fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not just the science, it's like the level of effort. And I'm always talking about the level of effort when it comes to building electrics, and it just seems like it's triple when it comes to like acoustic guitars and the materials necessary for them. So I gotta ask, like, is it worth it? Like at the end of the day, like with that huge level of effort, is this a viable, like lucrative effort?
Mm-hmm. You get your individual boutique builder, and they're like, "This is awesome," and I've got a customer I know that wants this, but that is such a finite entity that you can't rely on that. And I think something that speaks to the viability of the wood is when Santa Cruz did a big purchase last year. Richard is a hell of a builder. He's been doing it for 50 years. He's been on the forefront of sustainable, trying to use sustainable materials. And the fact that Richard is like, what is this? And started messing with the wood. And Richard got a rainbow of samples. He's like, this is fantastic. And it goes, if they can introduce it to a little bit bigger customer base, which is still boutique, but it's not necessarily the same structure as one man to a one-man shop to a one-person client. And then when some bigger companies that I got, introduced to at NAMM, are, and these are the pros. These are the people who are overseeing hundreds or thousands of guitars being built a year, are saying this stuff is awesome. It's so satisfying, because I've been doing this I'm in my 5th year of the effort going into all of this. And it's just really, and that was one reason initially I wanted to get samples to people to say, am I going to be wasting my time? Is this stupid? To, make me feel good about putting all the.
Oh no,
Might have lost Arran.
I think we lost Aaron.
Oh,
It's weird to
just
freeze
as we're about to get a conclusion to
Yeah.
the, if it's all viable or not. Just while he's on pause, I think it maybe might be useful if anyone's in the chat or watching in the future in the comments who makes electrics to put in the comment thread the sort of thickness that you're after when you build, because he was saying that Ty likes the thicker thicknesses, but maybe a bit of feedback that could be useful for Arran might be helpful. And also, just as total contrast, I'm lining up some future guests, and we've got Ray from Custom Unlimited Designs, who's in the chat at the moment, coming on at the end of next month, and he doesn't have a massive social media presence at the moment, but he makes 3D printed guitars, but not like I picture a 3D printed guitar looking. Some of the finishes look like they kind of paint jobs or some sort of unique laminate or inlay, but they're all 3D printed. So I'm keen to ask him questions about how that's made. It's totally different to this, obviously.
Yeah. Hey, Daniel, on that note, like another great guest would be, I don't know his name, the guy from Canna Guitars, who builds acoustics out of hemp stone and composite tops. So a stark contrast to what we've seen and heard today. So that might be a really good idea for a guest.
Right, I'll message you about that. We'll try and contact them. We've got, in a couple of weeks' time, we've got Jesse from Jaybird Guitars coming on. He has just started a podcast that's about, is that Arran? That's about timber and tunes, he's called it. So it's about woodworking, it's about music, how they link together, and part of the woodworking is lutherie. He used to work for Gibson, so I think he's gonna be an interesting chat. But next week we've got Ben, who I mentioned in a previous episode, who his company Battle Plan Harmonica makes microphone clips, but it's all 3D printed. So what I was hoping is he could give us an overview of how 3D printing works, but also, I mean, it's totally different to selling a guitar, but it's not different from selling parts. So some people I know make their scratch plates that they sell. Some people make templates. Some people make jigs that they sell that are 3D printed. So it'd be great to hear from him about how he does all that as well. We've got Arran back. Fantastic.
So I saw everything blink. I apparently lost power. So yeah. Sorry.
Just before we go back to where we left off, there's a question from Brad. What on earth is hempstone?
I don't really know how it's made. I know they use hemp fibers in some way, and it's sprayed onto a mold, which then creates the back of the acoustic. But it's all hemp fibers. You'll have to talk to him about how it's constructed. And he's got a YouTube channel where he kind of covers, all that stuff.
Interesting.
We'll hear about that. Arran, you were just about to tell us about whether it's viable or not. You were talking about it scaling up and bigger companies becoming interested. It all sounds viable.
It's been from an individual. Actually, Virgil Blind Guitars was the first to what I consider a pro to build with it. And from there, it's scaled up and it's gotten to bigger companies, some that produce, a couple thousand guitars a year. And when those companies who, again, through their production process, don't want to put hiccups in the system, are willing to use the material, then that once again reiterates the viability of it. You can't think that it's going to be spruce, because it's not going to be spruce. You can look at comparative data just to see how it compares to other species. It's a little denser, it's a little heavier, but I think it's got a higher, the species has a higher velocity of sound than either redwood or western red cedar. I think redwood. But I look for, after having gone through an array of logs, at the mill, and I mean the mill was kind of founded on cypress. So that was a big portion of stuff, and not sinker. But that was there was a lot of cypress, so I've been able to get my hands on, you know, thousands and thousands of board feet of it to feel the differences, and I like to think that I've dialed in what I'm looking for in the logs that are going to give a really nice bright sound, that are going to give good sustain and all of that. And it's just a matter of the different builders learning how to make it work for them. And I've had, you know, I've sent samples to people who said, you know what, this isn't for me. And I won't name some, you know, one builder built with Douglas fir and loved Douglas fir. And if you hold Douglas fir next to cypress, they can feel similar based off of whatever set you might have. But it all comes down to each individual, you know, their preference. But yeah, it's viable, in my opinion, or I wouldn't be doing it.
And you talked a little bit about sustainability, but what about scalability? Like, is your supply chain prepped for like a rise in popularity?
I don't plan on me. So the idea was never for me to outfit the entire world with bald cypress, sinker bald cypress. The idea was to have the bald cypress or sinker bald cypress be my little hook on my guitars, and have that help get my foot in the door in a place where it's hard to be known, and then let the word spread as here's another tonewood. So let's try and do our part. You know, my diver is certainly not the only diver, and I am certainly not the only crazy person who's like, yeah, let's get a log and break it down. I've done the legwork, and it's taken years to figure out where within the species I think it's usable. But I have no doubt that other people, you know, will start processing it for tonewood specifically. It'll take a while. It might be another 5 years. How long? There's looking at the timeline of soundboard species, trying to figure out, okay, when was the last time a topwood, a conifer topwood, was introduced? I kept running into walls, and Richard Hoover and I went back and forth a bunch on this. And he thinks that redwood was the last, and it was introduced late 60s to early 1970s. And so if you take, let's say 1972, how long before you consistently saw redwood, and it's salvaged typically, how long before you see that as a staple within the industry? 20 years, 25 years? It's a matter of enough people with the knowledge for processing the materials to then apply it to the tonewood world, and it has to be close, because the profit margins decrease if you're shipping a log from Georgia or South Carolina to Oregon, because it's not crazy expensive, but it's not inexpensive with your fingers crossed that you're going to have, you know, a 60% high grade yield from a log. And I'm not getting that much from logs for high grade material.
If the outcome is you've changed part of the market to start becoming more sustainable, and introduce an idea that there could be alternatives, and people might start looking for other alternatives.
Yeah.
So the question that I put off from the very beginning is, to guitars, and why guitars?
You broke up.
Everybody
I hear ya.
Oh, no. The question was, you work in a mill, you made furniture. Why did you move to guitars? Why guitars?
So I've played music. I went to music. I played music since I was like 5 or 6. Like every weekend at the family farm, all of us would gather at my grandparents' farm, and there was 22 to 26 of us every weekend, and undoubtedly we would all end up in the kitchen, 12, 15 people with guitars and maybe a fiddle or a violin, and everybody sitting, or a fiddle or a mandolin, everybody sitting around and playing and singing. And that is a core part of who I am. And I was at the mill turning over in my head tonewood potential and all of this. And I had sold a guitar 20 years ago that I wish I hadn't sold. And I wanted to get another guitar. And my wife said no.
Right.
And, so then I started, I was like, well, I'll just make one. And I started reading about it and realized the complexity of it. And I thrive off of challenge and troubleshooting. And that just seems like what acoustic guitars are. They're problems, they're troubleshooting, they're weird recipes of wood. And I had been at the mill long enough that I felt comfortable with, I never thought I would find myself running a mill and being able to go choose a log for a customer, process the log, air dry the log, kiln dry the log, and then turn it into a product. And that was an awesome, complete hands-on. And we had our own logging crew. So, that's where the logs were coming from. And it was a dual thing. I wanted to be continued to challenge myself, and I didn't feel like that was going to continue to happen at the mill. And so I also am not thrilled to build tables for eternity. It's great. It pays the bills and everything. But I mean, one thing my shop thrived on for a long time was production of in the hundreds and hundreds of individual things. And I said I'd set up my Ford factory assembly line in my shop and pump out 500 of this or 800 of this. And that's mind numbing. That's why I quit listening to music in the shop. I only listen to audiobooks because I would find myself screwing up production, going in time with the tempo or the whatever the music was doing would determine, my speed at production. So it's like 7 years ago, I quit listening to music in a shop. It's just the way this has gone is it was supposed to be guitars and then tonewood, because also after years of watching the industry do this for a one-man wood shop, I said, I'm not, I need multiple legs to stand on. And so if I can get the wood to catch on, then I can also sell that as the market ebbs and flows with guitar purchases, I can subsidize some income. And I've gotten a lot larger response to the material than had initially planned. So things have kind of flip-flopped on what's happening first. And to get the material out, I have to put a hold on guitar making. So it's, it is what it is. I said, I don't want to be doing this, troubleshooting, creeping on 50, and I just turned 44. And when I told my wife that this was what I wanted to do before I left the mill, I said, I need to do it. I need to go, or it's going to be years and years and years. And here I am years later, still trying to get to the guitar building. And it's just, the roll of the dice and the way it's happened, but it's awesome. Like I get so excited every time I start messing with the wood. And just like any, wood nut, I'll sit up in the wood stack some morning going to organize something, and suddenly 45 minutes have passed with me just looking at stuff and sorting things, and got to get back to work.
Yeah, incredible. I love that, getting lost in something like that. Well, look, I hope your journey gets you to guitar making soon, but the fact that you've introduced so passionately this new wood is amazing.
Thanks.
When you finally get to making the guitars, you can say that your guitars are built by the person that discovered the tonewood, the dark cypress tonewood.
And hopefully add some validity, at least a little bit of something to, well, the guitars are pretty good. Okay. Yeah. He discovered the wood, so he might know what he's doing with at least that part of the guitar. So.
Great.
It's fascinating stuff.
Well, I appreciate it, guys.
Thanks so much for being with us this week. Yeah. So for anyone that is watching, I've put a link to Arran's Instagram, YouTube, and also your website in the video description. Definitely going to sign up to your mailing list to hear more.
Thanks. And bear with me on the website build out. I rushed to get it ready for NAMM, and there's a lot of components, a bit more in-depth history of the logging industry in the area, history of synchro, I'm an information person, and I'd like to, build out the website a lot more. It's just, time.
I
So-
definitely did enjoy the narrative element of your website, like each section having great descriptions of how you got into it and
Thanks,
what the wood is. That's great.
All right, guys.
Great.
Cool.
Well, we'll say goodbye to everyone there. Thanks so much. And see you all next week. Totally different next week. I'll just mention when you're off, Arran, that we've got Ben from Battle Plan Harmonica, who makes mic clips, laser printed mic clips. And we can talk about the concept of laser printing, how it might
Sure.
cross over to guitars, and how to set up a business that sells small products. Great. Okay. Thanks, Scott. Thanks,
Cool.
Mark. Thanks,
Bye,
Aaron.
Bye.
Thanks, Ty.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Are you looking for an excuse to build a guitar? Or do you just want to be part of the community and see other people's builds? Why not take part in the Jurgs Cup? It's a community build-along where anyone can take part by simply sharing your builds either as photos or videos on social media and using the hashtag Jurgs Cup. You can engage in conversations in the comments section and get feedback from others. The build-along is named after Jürgen Zoller of Zoller Guitars, a valued member of the Guitar Builders Collective who regularly commented on other people's builds, giving them encouragement and ideas. The whole point of this build-along is to grow the community, to make online friends, to share ideas and inspire others. This year's competition ends on the 23rd of April, and if you're stuck for inspiration, this year we have an optional film, Use What You've Got. You can find out more via the Guitar Builders Collective forum, the Instagram page,